Okay. Hey, Peter, how are you?
Good, Douglas. Thanks for having me on your show.
Well, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. So, you're an author. Are you also a paramedic?
Yes, I've been a paramedic in the greater Hartford, Connecticut area for over 25 years. Just a few months ago, I went from full-time to part-time status, but every Friday I'm out there on the road answering 911 calls.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I bet you've seen a lot of stuff, yeah?
Yes.
Is COVID calming down at all now?
Yes, COVID's doing much better around here. Connecticut is, I think, the third best state so far as getting people vaccinated. Over 50% of our people have gotten at least their first shot. And so I also work at the local hospital and I track the COVID patients there. We're down to only 10 patients in our ER. And of the 10, only one of them was vaccinated and nobody's over the age of 70. When COVID first started, 70, 80, 90-year-olds were getting hit very hard. But right now it's largely unvaccinated people in the 30 to 60 age group. And they're not as quite as sick as the elderly people were when COVID first struck us.
Okay, so like a year ago, were most of your calls COVID related?
Not most of them, but we had quite a number of them. And the problem with the COVID calls was that they took quite a lot out of you. You had to put on a special gown, wear a face mask, goggles, bodysuits, and you had to just be really, really careful with the patients. And you didn't know who had COVID. Well, some people you knew clearly they had COVID. They were struggling so hard to breathe. And then the decontamination process after the call just made it very taxing and very exhausting on us.
Almost sounds like asbestos removal.
Yeah, it was. And I'm 6'8" and 230 pounds. And the bodysuits that we had to wear, I was like the Incredible Hulk. I'd put my arm and my leg in it and the suit would rip. So it was very difficult. In some cases, I had a double gown. I had to put a special apron on around my waist so that it would cover the rest of my legs.
6'8"? How did you get that tall?
Pardon me?
I said 6'8".
How did I get that big?
How'd you get that tall?
Well, I tell you, when I was a kid, I mowed lawns, and there was a chemical at the time that was used in a lot of the fertilizer called Rapid Grow. And we think that that's what happened. I grew a foot in 1 year.
That must have done it, yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
You've written a book called The Killing Season. Is that the correct title? Yeah?
Yeah, it's called Killing Season, the Paramedics' Dispatches from the Front Lines of the Opioid Epidemic.
We have heard a lot about the opioid epidemic, and I'm always kind of puzzled because opium and opium products have been around for centuries. This is nothing new, the particular products. I mean, they keep coming up with different versions.
Yes,
but
the problem, the reason that people are dying today is not because of opioids per se or even heroin. The problem is this new synthetic opioid called fentanyl. So let me explain why these deaths are happening. 5 or 6 years ago in Hartford, somebody could buy a little $5 bag of heroin. It was half heroin, half powder, sugar, baking powder, whatever. It's just so, and in the East Coast here, heroin is sold as a white powder. Now, the synthetic fentanyl is 50 to 100 times stronger than heroin. So the problem with that is, rather than getting a bag that's 50% active ingredient, if it's properly mixed, you're only getting maybe 2% active ingredient. The problem is it's not properly mixed. Fentanyl tends to clump. So you get this chocolate chip cookie syndrome sort of thing. So that in your little bag, which now goes for $4, you might not get any fentanyl at all. You might get 2%, which would be a single dose, or there could be 10% fentanyl in there or 20% fentanyl in there. You can't tell by sight. So every dose you take is like Russian roulette. And if you're using alone, with no one there to give you naloxone if you overdose or call 911, you're going to die. And the problem with COVID is COVID has driven people and made them much more isolated. So we have more people using alone and more people using with the dangerous drug fentanyl, which in Hartford, it's like 90% of the heroin is not heroin at all. It's just fentanyl. So the combination of fentanyl and the isolation has really caused deaths to skyrocket. We had a record number here in Connecticut this year.
Well, where did fentanyl come from? Because I haven't heard of it up until the last few years.
It's made in laboratories. A lot of it comes from China. Some of it comes from Mexico. Mexico will import the fentanyl, and then they'll mix it and ship it over. So the typical Mexican mix is maybe only 10% fentanyl, but people can buy it directly from China at 100% purity. The problem, no matter what you're doing when you're mixing it, because it mixes so badly, it's very dangerous. A number of years ago in Connecticut, we had a weekend where there was a number of overdose deaths on the East Coast. A number in Hartford and a number in New York and other places, and that was attributed to fentanyl. And they traced it back to a laboratory in Wichita where a guy who had been kicked out of high school for blowing up his science lab was the guy behind it. And he was sort of a modern day or an early day Walter White a la Breaking Bad, except instead of making methamphetamine, he was making fentanyl. They caught him, they shut him down, they said fentanyl's not going to be a problem anymore. Well, fast forward, 10 years from now, and fentanyl is so much more economical for the drug dealers to use because it's 50 to 100 times stronger. It's 50 to 100 times smaller, which makes it much easier to smuggle, and the economics of it are huge. So what we're seeing now across the country, fentanyl, which has been a huge problem on the East Coast, is moving west. It's going into areas where people typically use what's called black tar heroin. And because we're getting more fentanyl there. And the other thing with fentanyl that the dealers are doing is they're buying pill presses. So they're making fake pills. If you get a Percocet from your doctor, a Percocet 10, you know exactly how much is in it. But what the dealers are doing now is they're making fake pills. They look just like the original, but it's not Percocet. It's fentanyl and cut. And the same problem with the powder applies to the pills. You don't know if you're getting a half dose or 10 times your normal dose. So we're getting a lot of people who are buying Percocets off the street, taking one pill, which is normal for them, and having overdoses.
So is fentanyl something that is prescribed?
Well, so there's medicinal fentanyl, which is a great drug. We carry it on the ambulance. We give it to people who have broken legs or are in pain. It works very quickly, it's very powerful, and it doesn't last that long. That's medical grade fentanyl made in, laboratories that are approved by the federal government. The fentanyl that's being used on the street is made by, drug dealers in their laboratories and is very, very badly mixed and is far more potent, meaning there's far more active ingredient in the amount of fentanyl. For instance, so we carry fentanyl. If somebody stole the fentanyl out of my ambulance, they'd have to steal fentanyl out of 10 ambulances in order to get the same amount of fentanyl they can buy in a $4 or $5 bag on the street. So what we give is much less than what the people are getting on the street that's killing them.
Has the market for fentanyl been explored by law enforcement in terms of, what they can do?
Yeah, they're doing a lot to try to stop it. But unfortunately, the war on drugs, the interdiction, has been it's pretty much been a failure. There's more drugs on the street today than there were when the war on drugs started. The dealers, it's just so hard to stay ahead of them. And you knock off one dealer, another dealer pops up to take his place. It's very difficult for them to deal with. And, what some people are advocating is that what we really need to do is we need to decriminalize the drugs, and we need to stop looking at the battle on drugs as a criminal problem and look at it as a public health problem. Instead of treating drug users as criminals, we need to treat them as people who have medical disease. When I began as a paramedic, I thought people who use drugs had a character flaw. I'd tell them to just say no or you're going to end up dead or in jail. The reason I wrote my book is because I started talking to my patients and found out why they started using. Nearly every one of them had an accident. They were in a car accident. They fell off a roof. They had a tumor, and they were prescribed large amounts of prescription pills by their doctors. And then they got addicted. And addiction itself is a brain disease. It's, for certain people, they're more genetically disposed. But after a while, people who've been exposed to this large amount of these opioids, their brain gets rewired, and their brain tricks them to believing that getting more opioids is more important to them than eating, more important than procreating, more important than taking care of their children. It's a horrible, horrible disease, and we really need to try to work at trying to help people medically as we would help people with cancer or people with heart disease or people with broken legs.
Okay, you brought up something about decriminalizing, and that's been tossed around for a long time. Marijuana is starting to become decriminalized now. It has in, what, half a dozen states, maybe more than that, about 15 states where it's completely legal. Still not legal completely on the Fed side. But what do you do? Let's just say hypothetically, okay, tomorrow fentanyl is legal. Now what do you do?
So, well, what you would do is, rather than people buying the poison that they're buying on the street, what some countries have done is they produce medicinal quality heroin, so that people who meet special needs for the program, they go to a doctor's office or a health clinic and they use the drug there. They're under medical care and supervision. They don't overdose. They don't die. They leave. They go to their jobs. They pay taxes, and they go home to their families. They're able to subsist on this medicinal quality opioid. As opposed to what happens now is these same people are buying poison on the street. They're driven into the shadows by stigma and law, and we find them dead behind dumpsters. We find them under bridges where they've been dead for 3 days. The death toll is just horrible. And we really need to look at more radical changes if we really want to try to bring this under control. It's been successful in other countries. America might not be ready for it yet, but I think we need to move in that direction.
Well, similar to methadone clinics, right?
Yes, yes. Methadone and suboxone are two drugs that help people get off heroin and fentanyl, and enable them to work, to have families, to pay taxes, and be contributing members of society. Some people, they're able to wean off methadone and wean off suboxone. Other people are going to be on it for the rest of their lives. But the important thing is that they're staying alive, they're being able to be with their families, to live and contribute to their communities.
Well, we do have to wrap this up. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
Yes, my website is www.petercanning.org. I write a blog. I have excerpts from the blog there. There's stuff about my book. My book can be purchased at any bookstore or any of the online sellers. And again, the reason that I wrote it was to bring the voices of my patients to the public in hopes that it would change their views in the same way it's changed me to look at the opioid problem as a medical problem rather than a criminal problem.
Is there any serious legislation right now being considered to legalize or at least decriminalize it?
As far on the state level, there's more activity. Federally, to decriminalize, I haven't seen that, but they are increasing programs for methadone and suboxone, and I'm hopeful that they're going to move on what's called the federal crack house statutes, which right now prevent people from going to these places called safe injection sites, which they have in Canada and other places, and they have underground ones in America. And briefly, what happens there is, in the city of Hartford, if somebody goes into a McDonald's or a Subway and they shut the bathroom door and they inject, unless somebody knocks on that bathroom door, within a short amount of time, that person may end up dead in that public space. A safe injection site just down the street, somebody goes in, there's some health workers there, they have a bathroom there. What goes on in their bathroom is their own business, but they go in that bathroom, after 3 minutes, somebody knocks and says, "Brother, are you okay?" Nobody dies in that place. We're down the street. We've done quite a number of deaths in the McDonald's and the Subways of our city. Wow.
How's your book doing?
It's doing very well. Amazon named it as one of the top 10 nonfiction books for the month of April.
Oh,
so I was excited by that.
All right. Well, Peter, thanks so much for coming on the show and sharing your stories.
Thanks again, Douglas, for having me.